Well, welcome everyone back. And this is a session that about a bit more about IIMHL and Leadership Exchange next year. And my name is Francis Silvestri. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of IIMHL and IIDL. The picture behind me is my ancestral home outside of Rome, and it was either that or my office, and you don't want to see my office. So I thought this would be a better background. We're going to be talking about two parts in the next session. The first is we're going to talk about IIMHL and the what we call a strategic view of where we want to go, and we're going to be bringing in a couple of speakers for that. And then we will then, after finish, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Leadership Exchange in 2022. So what I want to do is welcome two people to talk to us about the strategic review that we've taken place. And this is a review that the board of directors and the sponsoring country leadership group felt we needed because we're just about 20 years old, and we felt it was time for us, especially with the changes in technologies and also with timing of COVID, that this would be a great opportunity to look at where we see our future going. So we're going to be bringing two people in, Steve Appleton, who is calling in from England early in the morning, and Barbara Disley, who's one of our board members from New Zealand. So I'm going to first turn over to Steve to start the slide deck in terms of looking at what we've been doing about looking at strategic review. Steve?
Hi, Fran, thank you very much. And hello to everybody. Good morning to you and good afternoon as well in some parts of the world, I think. So it's a great pleasure to be joining you from England. My name's Steve Appleton. I'm currently the European Regional Lead for IIMHL and IIDL. And I'm going to be joined, I think, by Barbara, and we're going to talk to you about our Strategic Leadership Opportunities Review. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you, and hopefully that will work. Hopefully you can see that. So what we want to try and do is just give you a bit of an overview of a process that we've been undertaking within IIMHL and IIDL over about the last 6 months or so. Actually, it's been quite a lengthy process. Essentially, the context for this, as Fran was beginning to outline there, was that our organisation is approaching 20 years of existence, and in that time there have been some significant achievements, but it's always helpful to take a step back and think about the mission that you have, the aims that you're trying to achieve, and what the future might hold for us as an organisation. And as Fran mentioned, the context for this also was the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant impact on people at all levels, but also on organisations and the way in which they work. And for IIMHL and IIDL, that's also been the case, and in a sense is exemplified by the fact that we're all meeting virtually today rather than in person. So our board decided in the middle of last year that it would be a good idea to undertake what's been called the Strategic Leadership Opportunities Review. And that was a consultation process that kicked off formally in November of last year. There was a small committee of our board led by one of our board members, Holly Echohawk, along with Barbara Disley and also Martin Rogan, who's board member from the Republic of Ireland. And that work was supported by myself and my colleague from North America, regional lead there, Cathy Langlois, who I think is on the call today. We established 3 lines of inquiry for this strategic review. The first area that we wanted to look at was leadership, both of our own organisation, but also the issue of leadership more broadly in the field of mental health, addiction and disability. Secondly, looking at membership, and in particular the engagement of our members around the world, of which there are over 4,000 individual members within our 9 member countries of IIMHL and the 8 member countries of IIDL. And thirdly, to look at issues relating to systemic change. So what are the factors that impact upon our work that are more macro in the sense of the issues affecting the world more broadly? It was an iterative process. As I say, it took place over a number of months, and it involved a range of consultations, including with our board members, but also members of our sponsoring country leadership groups for both IIMHL and IIDL. We held a number of focus groups and consultation sessions, as well as an online survey. And the key focus on leadership was around issues that support diversity and inclusion. So thinking about the kinds of steps that we as an organisation could take to broaden and deepen our diversity, and how we could enable our organisation to build upon its current practices. The report of the review was shared with our board on a number of occasions as it was developed, but its final version went to our board earlier this week. And I'm pleased to say that they approved the recommendations that are made in the report of the review, which Barbara will outline for you shortly. But just to give you a bit of an overview of some of the key findings. What we heard was the need to recommit to our culture and our values as an organisation. There was a need for us to try to define what leadership means in a post-pandemic world. So how has COVID affected the way in which organisations are led in the fields in which we work? A need to deepen diversity within our own organisation, but also to encourage it within the organisations that work with us. A particular focus on addressing inequities, and there are many of those, unfortunately, and many of them have been further highlighted as a result of the pandemic. How we engage with our members, as I mentioned a moment ago, how do we make the membership experience one of increasing and continued value for those that are part of our organisation? How do we do more to support people with lived experience to engage in our work, to help shape our work, and for their voice to be heard and acted upon effectively, both within our organisation, but within those that work with us? We're delighted to hear, in particular, although all the presentations were fantastic, but particularly to hear from Aisling about the work of the Emerging Leaders Group. And it's really important that we engage with young people and support emerging leaders, because we need to ensure that there is a continuity in succession planning, and we enable young and emerging leaders to come through and take on leadership responsibilities, both within IIMHL and IIDL, but also more broadly. We could continue to have a spotlight on service reform, innovation and development. That goes to the very heart of what we're about as an organisation, in terms of ensuring that innovation and good practice is spread rapidly around the world and also implemented around the world. Look at the role of our collaboratives, particularly within IIMHL. There are a number of collaborative groups and also where we can enable those collaboratives to work jointly across IIMHL and IIDL. And how we get the balance of our focus right, by which we mean not just thinking about services themselves, but also the broader sense of things like mental health and well-being, the prevention and promotion agenda in those areas, thinking about issues to do with public mental health. Getting that balance right is really important. How we look to grow our organisation beyond our existing country members and where we do that. So thinking about other countries that might be interested in joining us, in particularly countries in the global south. But in doing that, ensuring our financial sustainability. So not growing too quickly and ensuring that we are properly resourced. Thinking about the changeover of leadership, all of you will know that sadly Fran will be stepping down as Chief Executive and President of the organisation at the end of the year. So we're in the process of planning and executing a transitional process for that, which will culminate in the leadership exchange in Christchurch at the beginning of next year. And also some longer term future horizon scanning, where might we be in the next 10, 20 years and possibly beyond that looking forward. What are the sorts of issues that we think might affect the way in which we work that we might need to respond to? How do we adapt and how do we remain flexible as an organisation? So that gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the key findings from the Strategic Leadership Opportunities Review. I'm going to hand over to Barbara, who's going to talk you through some of the recommendations. And Barbara, I'll control the slides, so let me know when you want to move on to the next slide.
Barbara, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Kia ora, everybody. I'm Barbara Disley, and I'm an Australian by birth and a Kiwi by adoption, and I hail from the Wiradjuri people land in Tumut, New South Wales, and now live in the wonderful Hauraki Gulf on an island. So it's great to be here, and thanks for all of your time. So this piece of work has been really powerful, and I think it will shape our organisation going forward. So I'm just going to flip through the recommendations quite quickly so that you get a sense of what it was about and what they were. They have been accepted by the board, so we will be acting on these, so keep that in mind as we go through. So I guess the first was that we should develop a set of principles that really sets out what is leadership from IIMHL, IIDL, and what does that mean for how we go forward. So, and it would underpin and be a base for all of our work. The second recommendation was how can we enhance our, oops, sorry, my camera's off, just heard that. Sorry, folks. How can we enhance communication and do that with a high level of engagement? And it's these sorts of things that I think people were thinking about when they put that up as a recommendation. So how can we really strengthen the way we connect with each other? And we can see COVID has accelerated that already, but how can we build some of these really valuable mechanisms into how we work going forward? The third recommendation was really about broadening the representation at all levels, but particularly in the decision-making levels of our organisation. And again, it's that's a critical recommendation for the board, and they are already beginning to enact that. So how can we bring people of colour, Black, Indigenous, women, youth, and lived experience, LGBTQ, 2S, and all other leaders into this domain so that they have a real stake in shaping the organisation and contributing. Next one, Steve. The fourth, back one. The fourth recommendation was really that we develop a plan for very meaningful engagement of people. So right up and down and within and across our organisation. And as an international organisation, that is really very, very important because participation, particularly when there are costs often attached to that, are often driven more by whether people can afford to engage. So how do we find really meaningful ways and make sure that our contributing countries and we as an organisation find mechanisms and support people who may not have the same means as others to really be full members in every sense of the word. The fifth one was also that we work harder to amplify the work of both IIMHL, so the mental health side of the organisation, and IIDL, so the side of the organisation that looks to the needs of disabled people. And so how we do that across our organisation, we're also beginning to see some shift and change. And this is a classic example of that, this forum that you have organised. So number 6 was building in public health approaches and wellbeing approaches into what we do as an organisation, because it's not just about focusing on services and interventions and responses, but how can we really strengthen communities to be in charge themselves, and how can we hop in earlier and do things that will really make a difference, and what do we need to do to be supporting that direction of upstream engagement. Okay, Steve. Yep. One of the other recommendations which came from feedback was the importance of substance use and the addiction work that happens in many parts of our sector, but again, how can we strengthen the contribution that people in this sector make? And also, I think in all of our work, recognise the pervasive challenges that are provided across so many of our countries and globally because of substance use and addictions. And so how can we give that more space and time to grow and be and share and be part of what we do as an organisation? The 8th recommendation was really a plan for growing both individual and country membership. And how do we then service that, support that, but to get diversity, to really also engage in countries where we haven't been present, becomes part of this recommendation. So looking at countries that are seeking to contribute and be part of our network, but may also not have the means to do so. So how do we find ways as a global connecting entity to address and support a broadening of our membership base? The 9th one was doing what we're doing now, which is really using modern technology and in this well, we're not quite post-pandemic yet, unfortunately, but in this environment, how do we really take the learnings and become much more agile, much more connected, and do that with both face-to-face, but also virtual connections that really strengthen us. And the 10th recommendation was that the President and the Chief Executive, both current and incoming, would work with the board to develop a strategic plan for our organisation that would really give breadth and substance to all these recommendations. One more, right. And so the next steps were that the board has already considered this, as I've said, the report, and I'm pleased to say embraced it fully, and we will be picking up and moving forward, and also that there will be a plan that will drive this going forward, and we will be looking at how do we deeply embed those recommendations and the responses that they dictate into how we work as an organisation. So kia ora tātou, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Barbara. And I want to mention that we asked if people had questions, and I really want to thank people for submitting questions. And so Stephen and Barbara will answer some of the questions that you sent to us. And so I thought I'd start off with Steve. You've got a couple of questions that people asked that you might be able to respond to.
Sure, happy to do that, Fran. I mean, I think there were 3 questions that have been submitted that essentially are grouped together. So I'll just read those out and then I'll give a response. So the questions are: what do we need to build into our structures and systems to ensure that lived experience integration is not an afterthought, but an intentional and strategic development of leadership? And that's a question from Alan Twomey, the CEO of Changing Minds in New Zealand. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, Alan. The second question is from Sean McNeil, also from New Zealand. How do you intend to include a greater diversity of consumers and family members with a lived experience of mental health, addiction and disability in everything you do and at all levels of what you do? And finally, a question from Eddie. What about our work with people who are LGBTQ2S+? So I'll try and give you a broad response, I think, but pick up the elements of all 3 questions. I mean, essentially, I think the really important thing to restate is that as an organisation, IIMHL and IIDL is fully committed to ensuring that the voices of people with lived experience are very strong within our networks and within our organisation. And this goes to the heart of our desire to improve diversity and inclusion of a broader area of work. And certainly, as you'll have seen, as part of the implementation of the recommendations that have arisen from the strategic review, we'll be developing a strategic plan within which we expect that one of the actions will involve the creation of an advisory group on inclusion. So that will be one of the first steps that we'll be taking. and we'll be tasking that group with advising us on how we can ensure the full inclusion of the many diverse voices which are essential to ensuring that we have a really strong, sustainable and inclusive network. And that will include issues related to people with lived experience, people who are people of colour, Black, Indigenous communities, women, young leaders and LGBTQ members too. I think what I want to say is that all organisations need to take this area of work particularly seriously, and IIMHL and IIDL is restating its commitment to that. And in particular, the issue of people with lived experience. My own view on this, and I think that of our board too, is that people with lived experience may in the past have felt that their voices had been heard, but not always actively listened to. And I don't think that that is an issue that's unique anywhere in the world. We have to take on board very clearly what people with lived experience say to us, what they tell us, because they know best what works for them and equally what doesn't work well for them. And we need to ensure that their voice is properly heard and has an impact on the way in which we work, both in terms of the work that we do, but also how we shape our thinking and our public statements too. So we are absolutely committed to that issue of diversity and inclusion, and look forward to working with colleagues who might want to come forward to take part in the advisory group. And as Fran and I begin to develop the strategic plan, we'll be thinking about the ways in which we can enable people to participate in that process. So there'll be more news on that in the coming weeks and months. And certainly the focus around addressing Eddie's question, particularly around LGBTQ2 plus communities. I think that this is a particularly emerging area, and there's some interesting work, actually, to be a little parochial, that's happening in England at the moment through our mental health network within the NHS Confederation, where a number of leaders are gathering to think about these issues. And certainly we have some close links with them, but we think that that is an area of work that we should develop and take forward. So I hope that the sense that you have is that IIMHL and IIDL have reflected very carefully on these issues, and we are restating a commitment to them, looking to do some very specific and tangible work. And I invite all of you to contribute to that, to let us have your views, but also to bring your experience and expertise, because none of us have all the answers. But really, if we can strengthen our work in this area, I think that will be to the benefit of all our members, to our country members as well, and will enable us to do some particular work that will provide specific focus on the needs of a whole range of different communities in relation to mental health, addiction and disability.
Thank you, Steve. Barbara, we've got a few other questions that you were going to answer.
Thanks, Fran. The first question were, what are useful strategies for addressing stigma within our own workforce? And that came from Deb Fraser, Director of Mirror Services in New Zealand. So kia ora, Deb. Well, that is a challenge. It's been a challenge for as long as I've worked in mental health and addictions, and that's been over 40 years now. But I guess in our network, there are many people who've worked long, hard and with a great deal of tenacity to address stigma and discrimination. And we've had many areas where there's been campaigns and support for that, often targeting the general community. But within the workforce, I think probably there are two organisations that stand out. One is the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and they have done a lot of work around discrimination in the workplace, including discrimination within the health workforce, and also the City Mental Health Alliance. So just suggest maybe you could look at those. And Fran, I think you were participating in a match on addictions, workforce meets stigma and discrimination, and wondered if there were some words of wisdom you might have more recently about that.
Well, I think it was a really interesting match, and it does go to the core of one of the recommendations, and they were hoping that that match, which was jointly run by Ivan Frovic from the Queensland Mental Health Commission, and Emma from CADS in Waimata. I think what we're looking for is the discussion they had is workforce issues for people with addiction, and the fact that the stigma is oftentimes within the healthcare system. So we're hoping, we did, I think, a lot of work, and there are some examples that we could share that came out of that meeting that we'll write up, and because we wanted to have some specific results from the meeting. So we did both of those things, talked about the stigma within the workforce, but also we wanted to start launching a collaboration on leaders who are working in the addiction field.
Great. Thanks, Fran. And I've got a second question, again, a rather large question really, which is from Kim Rowe, NDIS Australia. So Kim's asked, given the challenges of mental health crossing both health and disability sectors, as well as justice, what initiatives are countries adopting for holistic approaches across government to support people with mental health challenges? So big question, and I guess the first of those are around the health and disability sector and the engagement there. And I think some of the work and even this whole match has been around how can we as sectors learn from each other and bring some of that rich learning from the disability sector into the health sector, and from the health sector into the disability sector. So in our own organisation, that's our challenge, and I think we're looking to address some of that challenge. In terms of around the world, there are a number of population and public health initiatives, and these have been labelled as Thrive strategies or Thrive initiatives, so may be useful to have a look at those in more detail as well. And I know that there are now, there's a growing emphasis on population-based strategies that look at things like inequity, discrimination, historical trauma through colonisation, lots of the issues which once weren't in our context but now are. And so I think there are some areas there that would be fruitful. In New Zealand, one of the closer to home examples is the New Zealand wellbeing approach. We've got a government that has been committed to promoting general wellbeing and have even framed their budgets around that. We've got a social wellbeing agency, and that's been set up to look at cross-agency initiatives where governments are, agencies are now required to work together, where there's interface, where money's being pooled to look at things like mental health and addiction needs and housing, and also measuring outcomes in relation to whole of health outcomes in a much broader way. So all of those things I think are really quite positive, but are examples of what might happen. And in the match, in the population health match, we will be looking at some of these social wellbeing cross-agency responses when we meet in Christchurch. So that's from me, Fran.
Great. Steve, I think we have one more question for you.
We do, Fran. We have a question from Petra Hill in Australia, who was asking what enhancements to legislative frameworks would better support diversity and inclusion in Australia. As all of you will know, I mean, our role as an organisation is not to do direct policy work. But of course, we do have an influence on policy and leaders who think about and develop policy. And we bring those colleagues together to share their knowledge and best practice, and particularly some innovation in that area. So we are also trying to seek and share knowledge on policy development through our update newsletter, which hopefully all of you see, that comes out every couple of months, twice a month actually, sorry. My understanding is that in Australia, legislation is one important element overall, and things like discrimination legislation, National Disability Insurance Scheme Act, state and territory mental health and disability access and inclusion legislation form a framework of legislation that can be used and should be used to ensure increasing and better support around diversity and inclusion. And the National Disability Strategy is currently under review. So that's not legislation in and of itself, but it provides an opportunity for the whole of government, community and business in Australia to think about the approaches that they need to take. And as I understand it, also in New Zealand, there are plans to update the Mental Health Act, and the new Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission is likely to look at legislative framework as a result of that. And so there'll be knowledge to share there. And again, being parochial for a moment, in England, some of you will be aware that we had an independent review of our own Mental Health Act, led by Professor Simon Wesley, which reported about a year, 18 months or so ago. And the response of our government has been somewhat delayed as a result of the pandemic, but there is an ongoing consultation in response to the recommendations that were made in that independent review. And quite a strong focus in that review was around issues of diversity and inclusion, and in particular, the issues in England where people of colour are overrepresented in the use of our compulsory powers under our Mental Health Act. So a particular focus in that consultation will be how to address some of those issues. I think that legislative framework are helpful, but also there's a broader issue about how you embed the sorts of things we've been talking about in relation to diversity and inclusion alongside the legislation in terms of our practice and our policy more broadly, not just a reliance on the law in and of itself. And I think our role as an organisation is to promote both approaches and to ensure that we can share that knowledge and expertise across countries. And so I'll be looking with great interest to see what's happening in Australia, as well as what's happening here in Europe and in North America. Thanks, Brad.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve and Barbara, for helping us share what's happened with both our review, but also answering some of the questions. I really appreciate people's interest. I think that we have an opportunity now with both Steve and Barbara and the other board members' leadership to really look at the next decade of IIMHL and making progress in the 20 years of successes of what we had. So thank you for both Steve and Barbara, and especially for Steve, because it's just still not quite 4 o'clock in the morning there.